whose book, Ants Among Elephants, is an unflinching account of caste realities. Nupur Paiva, who has written Love and Rage, The Inner Worlds of Children. Humprey Hawksley, the author of the Future History series. And Lathika George, who has recently authored Mother Earth and Sister Seed. The panel will be in conversation with Manu, journalist, writer, and most recently, the author of Miss Leila, Armed and Dangerous. Please welcome them on stage with a huge round of applause.
Should we ask them to switch it off, or is it okay? Yeah. Yeah. I hope you, good afternoon and thank you so much for coming. I hope you understand the meaning of the topic, which is across genres, because actually we don't. When I see words like genre, I feel that some bullshit theory is going to follow. Like hunter-gatherer, you know. But we're not going to waste too much time trying to fabricate the meaning of it. We don't have too much time. And in fact, what we're going to do is, we are going to discuss several issues, and we are going to ask the audience at the end of it, what you think is the theme or the topic which has emerged at the end of the discussion. So this is going to be very unusual, actually, yeah. My first question is for Sujatha, who is from a Dalit family in India, and when she was a young woman, she went to the United States, and she saw a very different world. And one of the things that will fascinate Indians, especially apart from the fact it's a very powerful biography of her family, is that she uses the word untouchable. And when she tries to introduce the concept in America, it leads to very interesting moments. In fact, she tells a man in the bar, I'm an untouchable, and he tells her, but you're so touchable, you know. It's almost converting a very deep racial issue into flirtation, which was a very interesting moment. So Sujatha, your parents were lecturers, and you yourself were a physics academic. Can you take us through the events that made you become a conductor in New York?
You know, my family is not a typical Dalit family.
Are you able to hear her clearly? Yeah, maybe you can hold it closer.
Can you hear now? Okay. My family is really not a typical Dalit family. I would say our family is like in top 2% of the untouchables, and we had the fortune, we were fortunate enough to go to school. My family, because of English missionaries, and once they got educated, they learned the importance of education, because we didn't have any property. We still don't have any property. So I wouldn't say that I'm a typical untouchable. And so it's because it's in the family that we automatically went to school. I studied physics, and I went to IIT Madras as a research associate. And then I wanted to pursue PhD in America, but I kind of lost direction because it's a new place, and as an untouchable, I wasn't able to be part of Indian network over there. And you know, these things work on a network basis. You have caste networks, and Dalits don't have such a network. So I kind of lost direction at that point, and I became an IT professional. At that time, anybody who can type on a computer could become an IT professional. And in 2009, there were layoffs because of the latest recession, and at that point I became a conductor. And how it came to be is that as a Marxist and a person who was in revolutionary working class peasant type organization, I always romanticized being a working class type of person. And the second thing is, being in India also, there are so many restrictions on women. You can't laugh when you're in public. You have to keep your legs closed, and don't wear your clothes like this, that. And I always wanted to be in a job that's kind of like known to be a male job. Those are the two reasons that I became a conductor. Also, I didn't fit in much in IT because it's all full of upper caste Indians, and it was very hard for me to get along with them.
Does America have a caste structure?
Yes, it does. In my opinion, racism is caste. Because, as you know, there are people, black people with the darkest skin to someone who looks like white. So it really is not based on skin color, like people think it is. It's basically your descent from somebody who came from Africa as a slave to United States. So because it's descent-based, just like caste, caste is not chosen by a person or given to a person later on. They're born into it. So blacks in America has the same situation where they're born into, the race which came as slaves. And the second feature that makes me think of racism as caste is segregation. In India, in rural areas, untouchables always live in a segregated area. And in urban cities also, it is like that. They ask you what your caste is when you go looking for a house to rent. And in America, even the Jim Crow, which is segregation, official segregation, has been dismantled. Blacks rampantly face housing discrimination. So housing discrimination and discrimination because of your descent is what makes me think caste is like race.
And I also want to ask you, what is your perception of Gandhi, and would you call him Mahatma Gandhi, as he's called here?
No, I wouldn't call him Gandhi. Gandhi has never been a person for eradication of caste system. He wanted to keep caste system intact, but prettify it in some way. He wanted Bungis to remain Bungis, but he was asking caste Hindus to respect them for what they do. There was a lesson that I studied in 9th class in a Hindi lesson. He says that you should look upon Bungi as a mother. A mother cleans her baby when it shits. So it doesn't mean that the mother is inferior. So you should treat Bungis just like that. He's not saying that they should leave their caste occupation and become, be able to pursue any kind of career. He's not saying that other caste people should go and become Bungis as well. He's saying that they should remain as Bungis, and he's pleading with Hindus to respect Bungis. That is not anything to do with, that has nothing to do with dismantling of caste. And Gandhi was not only casteist, but he was also a racist during his stint in South Africa. He looked down on black people in Africa. He called them kafirs. And for some reason, just because Gandhi started his political career in South Africa, Africans think that he's a great guy, but lately they have been finding out, and I think it's in University of Kenya that they demolished a statue of Gandhi recently.
Nupur is a child psychologist, and I want to ask her a question about marriage and children. I think a lot of couples are together because of love, of course, so common, and or maybe because of habit, like a nation is a habit, and or maybe they have EMIs which they're paying together. But most powerful reason usually is children. people are in marriages which are not always enjoyable because they feel it's best for children. So I want to ask Nupur, is this view of a lot of married couples to be in a marriage because it's the best thing for the child or the children correct?
I'm actually going to go a little further back, Manu, into that question to wonder out loud about how many people actually think before they get married or think before they have children. Because there's so much of this is a course of the next stage of life. And it may be for some, it may not be for some. And I think that we end up in romanticizing the idea that marriages are about love. That's a very recent concept, actually. Marriages have historically not been about love at all. They've been about alliances. They've been about making connections between villages, properties, families. And in India, actually, you don't marry an individual, you marry a family. And so marrying for love in itself is on flimsy ground, which we know because marrying for love is not really encouraged still. And then children. I mean, children seem to just come along without anybody thinking about it. And that's where the complexity seems to start. Then once they are there, what are we supposed to do with them? Now everything that the parents are doing, not doing, suddenly now has an impact on these children and their developing personalities. So it's a little bit of a sort of afterthought. Okay. So parents staying together or a couple staying together for their children is not an easy one to answer because it kind of depends on what's going on between the couple. A bad marriage is a bad situation. A good marriage is a good situation. And children know the difference. And some of what I write about in my book is about how children pick up unspoken things from the air in the house. Because children and parents are connected wordlessly a lot before they were connected through words. So in the communication and the lack of communication between mother and father, between in-laws and the next generation, between men and women in the family, that is how our children learn how to be, where they fit in, who's supposed to behave like what. And children are therefore they're very observant and they're very aware of who's where in the pecking order. So children know that there's a conflict between people because of the tone of voice, because of eye contact or the lack of it, physical proximity, who sits near whom, who touches whom. How do people answer the phone? Children know by the way in which mother will answer the phone, whether it's dad on the line. And how have they figured all of this out? And so for us to think that, we can kind of hoodwink children into thinking sab theek hai is actually giving them very little credit.
There is a moment in her book, in one of the essays, where it's actually a woman who recounts her childhood. Her father is going away for several months, and he gives a sideways hug to his wife. And she thinks it's okay, it's loving. And I was thinking, what a naive child. But then later on, when she becomes an adult, she realizes that obviously there was nothing in the relationship if you're going away for a few months, and the best thing you can do is to give a sideways hug. But so there are a lot of things which they actually know, which adults don't realize that children can see. But I wanted to ask you, is there a way to fool children into believing that everything is all right?
Yeah, we'd like to believe that. The short answer is no. What we do if we do that is, what we achieve with children if we try to sweet coat it or coat it with sweetness or sab theek hai, is that we're telling them what they'd like to hear. But what we end up doing is messing with their radar, because their radar is telling them that something is not okay. But then when the adult who they trust and look up to and want reassurance from disputes their radar, it really is very, very confusing. Now, who do I believe? Do I trust my own instincts? Do I trust the information that I'm picking up? Or do I trust my mother or my father, who I have to trust? So actually, you kind of lose credibility in the long run, because the child will grow up and discover that they've been had. And it's not going to bode well for them learning to trust themselves, which they're going to need a lot of outside in the world. And also what is going to do to their relationship with the parent.
One of her chapters is titled The Good Divorce, which I plan to steal for the title of my own book later at some point.
We'll talk about that later.
So what is the perfect divorce?
The perfect divorce is one where the parents can acknowledge, well, people can get divorced without having children as well, but since we're on this topic, I'm bringing children into it.
Yeah, the question is in relation to, yeah.
That's right. So, to acknowledge that you decided to get married, it's not working, you can unmarry. But you can't stop being parents to your children. Once you participate in that and you have contributed your genetic material, you continue to be connected. Now, a good divorce would be a situation where you are upfront about that there are some relationships that you can move away from, but there are others that you have responsibility towards. The other good situation from the child's perspective is one where parents don't use their children to pit against each other. And that's really important, because children want a relationship with both parents, no matter how badly they get on or don't get on with each other. And children are often, even in families that are together, children are asked this question apparently naively all the time: who do you love more, mom or dad? That's an awful thing to do to anybody, because the truth is both, and also not. Because children love and hate you at any given point. And it's always useful to have a parent to love when you hate one. So children need both. So the perfect arrangement in a divorce situation would also be to continue the relationship that you have with the child without dragging in the one that is getting ruined.
Excellent. Lathika, your book is a celebration of the Indian farmer. It is a journey through the Indian farmland, through Indian agriculture. And Indian agriculture is kind of almost synonymous with depression in India, but then she is celebrating various aspects of Indian agriculture and farming and the farmers. Actually, the small Indian farmer is venerated chiefly by people who are not farmers. Sometimes I feel that India is like a creative writing workshop where it teaches you always show, never tell. So India never tells anybody, don't become a farmer, you're going to be doomed, but it shows, because it's such a difficult thing to be. So can you...
But I think India is telling the farmer and any would-be farmer that it is a depressing occupation. Don't go into farming. We're not encouraging you. We're not going to give you anything. Even if it's not in so many words, it's out over there. But I realize my book could be seen as a rather self-indulgent, dreamy sort of view of farming. But
you're from a farming background.
I'm from a farming background too. And I mean, there are rich farmers in my family. There are poor farmers in my family as well. Some with very little land who just have to make do with what they have because they've inherited only so much. So, I mean, the thing is, some leave farming. They sell their land and go find another occupation. Not everyone is meant for farming. So, the thing is that if we don't romanticize an occupation that is so much needed in this world, I mean, what can we do without farming? There is joy and there is a romance in farming. And what about our celebrations, the harvest? And a lot that we get out of farming is actually coming from that joy. Imagine if there was only doom and gloom in farming and there was nothing else. You would have to do away with most of our celebrations as well, which actually go with farming. And I think this is a way of life that has to be encouraged and has to be promoted in every way, and we have to see that. And it's not all doom and gloom. I definitely don't believe that.
What is the most interesting farming community you encountered while working on this book, or even earlier?
There were many. I mean, it was so hard to choose. I mean, where to go, and sometimes it was a success story like Sikkim. It's 100% organic state, and how they managed to do it, and everything looks so wonderful over there. So I have written about Sikkim. The honey collectors, I think they were that was the community of honey collectors that was so touching. It was so tragic. There were tragedies every year, about like 80 to 100 honey collectors are killed. And I think I've mentioned there's a story about a woman who had to make this very difficult choice. She has 2 children, and her husband, she's a widow, her husband had already been killed by a tiger. So she was living in this village, and the tiger visits them often. And she was about to leave her home, and she had a little son and daughter with her. And within, the tiger turned around a corner, and in that split second, she had to decide what to do. So I heard this at a conference, and we were debating it all along. I mean, how does a mother choose what to do? If it was her, I mean, the 2 children would be orphaned. They would both be in an orphanage somewhere. If it was the son, it would be her and the daughter. So it went on, and in that split second, she pushed the daughter towards the tiger, and the 2 of them ran away. So there were people going from Calcutta, people from NGOs to discover what had happened. And that actually, I just wanted to see this area where this had happened. How do people have to live like this? How do they have to make such difficult choices? Why don't they do something else? I mean, why do they have to go out into this forest where there are tigers, and they know almost every honey collecting expedition, 1 or 2 people die. I mean, and there are so many traditions and rituals. They go into the forest with a mask on the back of their heads because the tiger doesn't attack from the front. And I also met the most amazing man. He was a captain of our boat, and he was a survivor. He came face to face with the tiger and survived. And so, I mean, I had to go and see that.
And activists tell us that farmer suicides are because of poverty and capitalism and a lot of other economic issues. And if you try to tell them that what if it's a mental health issue, they get a bit annoyed. But what do you think is the primary driver, assuming that there is a phenomenon called the farmer suicide?
A farmer suicide, actually, one of the farmers I met told me, there are suicides everywhere. Now, he said my cousin moved to the city. He's a computer technologist, and he was depressed, and he committed suicide. No one has statistics for that. They don't call it a computer technologist suicide, or there's no term like that. And farmers feel a little like they're being patronized. I mean, everywhere I went, I saw that, I heard it from them. But farmer suicides are happening, there's no doubt about it. So there's a variety of reasons why they commit suicide. There's mental health, definitely. Very, very sadly, some of them know that any chance their family has of retrieving something out of this mess they've got into, the debts that they can never pay, is from a settlement they may get from a, so it's almost like a, I don't know, it's like
so
a
that's one of the
mission.
calculations that, so it's almost like this compensation is encouraging
I wouldn't say it's encouraging. They are at the end of, I mean, the thing is that it's also a lack of community support. So I think a lot of, NGOs are going out over there to talk to people, to talk them out of it. Because you find agrarian distress in many areas, very, very poor people. When I went to Meghalaya, I can actually say that, I don't know how to say they are happy farmers. They have so little. They still use the old tools, in these Khasi hills that they've been using for generations back. They don't have machines. where they don't even have bridges. So they make their own bridges with roots, and so it's actually a sense of community that, I mean, farming communities have to get together. And I think when, like the cotton farmers in Vidarbha and in Maharashtra, even in Punjab, they're sort of isolated from their own traditions, from their own ways of life when they go into other ways of farming.
Yes.
So that's what they lose in the process. So that lack of community and also mental health. So.
Right. Humphrey, how are you?
I'm well.
Great, we have not forgotten you. Yeah. Humphrey is a journalist who writes fiction. How unusual is that? You know, he sells more copies than me. He's extremely popular, and he's, I think, almost as popular as Dan Brown, but I think you write in English. Yeah.
We're getting there, bit by bit.
So some of your books have been very popular. Man on Ice is going to be released. Can you, yes, that's the one. And can you, I'm going to ask all the questions I'm asked, but before that, I want you to take us through the book, whatever you want to say about what this book is about.
Yeah, I mean, it's been fascinating listening along here, because what you're talking about when you write fiction is basically storytelling that people understand. So it's based in some sort of fact and some sort of real situation. And I did 3 books, I've done 3 books, all based in India in some way, that were fairly successful about 10 years ago. And they were called Future History, books like Dragonfire and Third World War. And it was all about governments fighting each other and the world blowing up. And then around 2003 or 4, the publishers said, well, they're not really selling very well. I think people were fed up with war because of Iraq. Can you do something else? And as in the fiction field, it's taken me about 10 years to work out what to do. So this here, the Man on Ice, it incorporates everything that we've heard here. It's set on the US-Russian border, because I had to find a sort of war area that nobody's yet covered. And on that border area, although I didn't know it before that, there are 2 islands. One is Russian and one is American, and they're only 2 miles apart. And on the Russian island, there's just the Russian military, a small military base and watch posts. And on the American island, there's a village of 80 people who are Eskimos or Inuits. They're the Native American Indians, but they live in the cold. And I lived with that community for a bit to research the book. And everything that I've heard here about marriage, and I went as a journalist, and as a journalist, you often like to get the community, and you get the mother and the father and the kids, and you profile the family. It took me about 3 days to realize that they didn't have families. There wasn't such a thing as mom, pop, and 2 kids. Because the Eskimo tradition was to go out and hunt. And if you went out to hunt on the ice or at sea, you might be away for 6 weeks or 6 months. Nobody knew. So you lent your wife to somebody who was staying behind so that that family would be safe. So I would bump into kids who didn't really know who their parents were, but they'd be living with somebody and then somewhere else and all the rest of it. And whether this is a good way to live or not, who knows? But there was an old church there with a battered cross. Nobody was in it. They kept meat or something in there during the winter. And that's when the missionaries had tried to go in there early in the 20th century and for a bit. And then they left because they realized that they couldn't get that sort of, Christian ethos. It's not the good or bad ethos, the sort of nuclear family ethos, into this community. They were wild people living in a wild environment, a community of the landscape, and a very, very tough landscape too. And then in the American eyes, you get the class and caste system, because they're looked down on and all the rest of it. So in this book, what I've done is I've had Russia move into this island suddenly and take it. And then this is how the book begins, so I'm not giving anything away, I hope. And then America has to decide what to do. And it has to decide whether it's to go to war with Russia or how to negotiate its way out. But the Eskimo community is the community that rises up and saves its own village. And it does that not because they're Americans or because of good or evil or God or anything like that. It's because it's their land. And there was one guy, a very old guy that I spoke to there, and I'll always remember this, and I said, are you a good patriotic American? The reason I asked this is because on this border, if you think Russia and America, these are the two big superpowers, not one flag on either side, not one border mark, nothing to tell you that these are two different countries. And I said, are you a patriotic American? He said, no, I'm not. He said, I'm an Eskimo from the Little Diomede, which is the name of the island. And I said, well, you're an American citizen, aren't you? He said, I might be that, but the Americans bought us when the Alaska Purchase in 1865. The Americans bought us, so who knows? The Chinese might buy us next time and they'll try and call me Chinese, but actually I'm an Eskimo citizen of the Little Diomede. And that was the sort of grassroots heroism that I think you get in all countries in the world, where people are fighting against the sort of class thing, fighting in their landscape to survive, and working out how best to be married or not married and bring up their children.
Great. I also want to ask, there is a sense that journalism trains you to write fiction. Is that overstated? Would you agree?
That journalism
trains you to write better fiction?
No. One of the biggest learning curves as a journalist is that you think, okay, I've just got this book contract, I'll whip it out in a month or two and it'll go in. Absolutely not. Because what you have to do is you have to, you would know this, is you have to get the characters. And the characters are everything. And if you don't have a strong character, and if that character doesn't do what you, the reader, thinks that he or she should naturally do at that time, then you lose the reader. Because fiction is a jump of reality. So this here is a post-Putin era book, in case Putin died before it was published, and then it would be put in the bin. So I've made it a post-Putin era book, so I have to put everything a little bit in the future. And then you have to, you know, how it's post-Brexit, post-Britain leaving the European Union. So how would all those things work, and who is driving it? And we've just had the Me Too thing. So there's a lot of, you know, there's a female ambassador, and there's a female sharpshooter, and there's, you know, because women are up. So how do the men handle that? And one of the issues that I've got in here, because it's just got a review in the Lady magazine in London, and they were discussing with me what is it. I said, well, for women readers, which are 80% of the readers, you can say that it's a deal. What is a deal breaker for love? And in this book, and I'm not giving away the plot, the guy he goes away and he methodically kills the enemies and saves the community. The heroine is a doctor, so she saves the community in a different way. When all the dust has settled and they're engaged to be married, she looks across and she says, I can't marry this man. I can't love this man anymore. Because she doesn't want the father of her children to be such a methodical killer. So for her, that was the deal breaker for love, yet he had to do what he did in order to save everybody. So these are the sort of, and in a way, then you become into the psychological thriller type of thing here. And in the modern thriller, you can't just do like the old Alistair MacLean books or even the books I used to. You have to put these human twists in it to make it work.
Great. So we have only about 7 minutes left, so I'm going to ask just one question each, and if you want to be brief, it'll be nice, but you don't have to be. So Sujatha, I want to ask you, India has been horrible for the Dalit community. Do you like India? India has been a horrible place historically for the Dalit community. Yeah. Do you like India? Do you like anything about India?
You know, I was born here. I didn't choose to be born, so I can't say that I like India on the basis of like patriotism and nationalism. I'm a Marxist, and Marxists are internationalists. So wherever oppression is, we Marxists are concerned. So in that sense, I don't really have any particular connection with India, but then, you know, as someone who's born in the Dalit community and raised here, I'm more of an expert in it than anything else. And
you know, this country shaped me, my personality, so that's about it, but I'm not patriotic.
Okay. Nupur, what is one thing about children that most people do not know or realize?
I have a bit of a list actually. Okay, I'll pick two. Uppermost is that we don't remember that we have a very rich internal world that kind of can operate separately from what's going on outside. So children can live in their heads, in fantasy, in imagination, and that's a very, very important part of their reality. And it takes inspiration from what's going on outside, but it gets a life of its own on the inside. The other thing I think children are sort of not really understood about is the intensity of how they feel everything. So everything is the end of the world. Whether it's love or whether it's rage or whether it's excitement, it's very for the moment, in the moment, it's all consuming, and it's very difficult to keep opposites together while they're together all the time.
Lathika, I don't mean to annoy you at all, but I'm very tempted to ask you now, the new health, according to latest science, I don't want to call it a fad, grain has been greatly defamed. And grain.
Grain, yeah.
And in fact, in India, what we subsidize is exactly what's going to kill you.
Yeah.
So can you just react to this nicely?
I would say turn to millets. I mean, millets are the superfood. I mean, they're what our ancestors...
So you're not very romantic about the rice, wheat kind of a thing, that they are still important culture?
No. I mean, before that, we are rice eaters. But millets is what we used to eat. I mean, it's full of nutrition. There's a whole chapter actually about millets in my book, and other superfoods. And I really believe that food has to be redefined. I don't think that people would starve actually if we learned how to eat like our ancestors did, because actually there's food everywhere. And in fact, it was a scientist who told me this. And he actually had an experiment where he asked the women in his self-help group to go out and find anything that could be eaten, every edible thing on the land. And they came back with baskets of greens and tubers and leaves and said, you know, if we go on like this, there won't be anything left for the cows. So, I mean, there's food out there for everyone, and millets is the superfood and the food of the future.
Humphrey, you have 2.5 minutes.
I'm a broadcaster, it's fine.
Yeah. Some literary, I don't know what literary fiction is, but it's something. But some literary fiction writers feel that you don't need to be entertaining at all, that you need to say what you want to say, you don't have to be readable, blah, blah. That is art. You know, as a very entertaining writer, how do you see that? How do you perceive this view that a story need not be interesting or entertaining?
Well, I think that at the BBC, where I worked for years, you have to inform, educate, and entertain. And I think what's happening now in the way that literature and everything is going is the entertainment comes first, and we've got to be very careful not to make it just that. The entertainment element is what draws people in, but underneath that you need to have, I think, some sort of educational and information, and it all goes down to storytelling. In each of these books here that we've written, it might be, you might think it's a heavy academic topic or it's a non-fiction thing, but within that are the nuggets of the story. And the story is about people and things that we can relate to. And if they teach us a little bit of something here and there, then that is what our job is as writers. But it's all storytelling, and then, which is in a way entertainment. Just imagine people sitting around the fire on a winter's night, no television, no social media, no Twitter. They tell stories to each other. And those stories entertain and they inform.
Great. So what is the topic of this panel? That's we have just 1 minute left. So if anybody wants to quickly say what you thought as the topic.
I thought it was just a mix of different genres. As they said, I understood the topic. But can I have a question? Can I have a question to Sujatha Gidla about being an internationalist as a Marxist? As I understand it, the failure of Marxism in India has been because they took orders from Russia. So there was always this fear that, you take orders from another country. Will it be harmful to your interests? So I just thought you could add something on that. Thank you.
Will what be harmful to my interests?
Taking orders from another country.
You said you were an internationalist with regard to your Marxism, and that's what it is about. Yeah. But in India, the failure of Marxism has something to do with taking orders from Russia. So there was this fear that, communists are listening to another nation, and that could be harmful to your own interests. So I just wanted you to have your take on it. Thank you.
Well, first of all, it's not the failure of Marxism. It's not a failure of communism. It's the way the Indian communists, in my book, I always wrote communists with capital C because they call themselves communists, but they're not. I mean, it's the way they're practiced that is a failure. It's not the failure of Marxism. And secondly, at that time, Russia was interested in protecting its own interests, so it subordinated other communist movements in other parts of the world to its own interests, in its own selfish interests. So taking orders from them was a bad thing, but it could be the other way around. If there is a genuinely socialistic country that likes to see socialism, blossom in other parts of the world, learning from their experience and listening to them is not a bad idea. It depends on who it is coming from.
See, I don't mind if you have time, it's up to you guys. Do we have time for questions? No? I'm so sorry. Do you want to cancel the next panel? I think the answer is no, but thank you so much for coming here. Thank you.